Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. Nearly 500 drones and 20 missiles. Russia has conducted its biggest attack on Ukrainian cities so far. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says that the Kremlin will be ready to take on the alliance by 2030. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Poland to face the second highest budget deficit in the EU. Robert Lewandowski quits the Polish national football team. And European far-right leaders meet with Marine Le Pen. After the biggest Russian aerial attack on Ukrainian cities so far, the Kremlin and Kyiv are conducting a prisoner swap, as agreed during negotiations in Turkey. 1,000 POWs on both sides are to return home. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General warns that Russia will be able to attack the alliance by 2030. Zuzanna Jurek reports.
Ukrainians gathered to mourn their fallen following Russia's Sunday night drone attack, the biggest perpetrated by Moscow against civilian targets since the start of the full-scale invasion. Nearly 500 drones and 20 missiles were launched in the strike, with Ukrainian Air Force indicating that at least 10 locations were hit, with debris affecting 17 others. Apart from Kyiv, the strikes importantly targeted western and northwestern Ukraine. According to experts, however, the scale of this latest assault is not surprising.
Retaliate against Ukraine's very clever drone attack. Russia will never admit that it was a very clever attack, but it was a very clever attack, both from the harm that it caused and the way it was executed and the way it caught everybody's imagination and impressed people around the world. Russia is not going to let that go unavenged, and the Ukrainians knew it.
In a massive blow to Russia's air capabilities, the Security Service of Ukraine carried out Operation Spiderweb on June 1st. Employing 117 drones, Kyiv targeted Russia's nuclear-capable long-range bomber fleet.
We are talking about around 10–12% of Russia's strategic, aviation.
Russia's retaliation did not go unnoticed by Ukraine's allies either.
In connection with air attacks by the Russian Federation on Ukrainian soil, Polish and Allied aircraft were scrambled in the morning hours to patrol Polish airspace. These efforts are preventive in nature and taken to ensure security and monitor the situation in the immediate vicinity of Polish borders.
Kyiv too was determined to continue to strike where it hurts by targeting Russian bases yet again. This included an assault on the Savaslienka airfield about 400 miles from the Ukrainian border. The installation is home to MiG-31K fighters carrying Kinzhal hypersonic ballistic missiles, used to strike targets within Ukraine far from Russia's border. But while Ukraine is moving decisively to degrade Russian air capabilities, NATO allies are preparing to bolster theirs.
Hello.
During his visit to London on Monday, Alliance's chief Mark Rutte called for a 400% increase in spending on air defences and missiles.
So we will strengthen the shield that protects our skies. Our militaries also need thousands more armoured vehicles and tanks, millions more artillery shells. And we must double our enabling capabilities. Allies will invest in more warships and aircraft. To give just one example, America's allies will procure at least 700 F-35 fighter jets.
But while the Kremlin dubs this call to bolstering arms confrontational, experts point out that it is vital not just for NATO but also its war-torn partner.
Ukrainians have been targeting military objectives, airports, as we know, but also factories producing the war materials and drones and powder, gunpowder and other stuff for the Russian war effort. So right now, Ukraine is desperate for to beef up its air defenses because it's aware that Russia is not going to stop.
But just as the latest swap of prisoners of war started on Monday, Russia's dubious willingness to engage in ceasefire talks is on full display, with missiles continuing to rain on Kyiv, showing that Moscow is playing for time through appeasement. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
6.3%. That's how high the Polish budget deficit could be this year, according to the European Commission. It's the second highest deficit in the EU and more than twice what is considered a safe level. It may prove difficult for the country to bring this number down, as it just embarked on a massive defence spending spree. Jan Kennedy has more.
Poland is ramping up its defence in response to the growing threat from Russia. In 2025, it's set to become NATO's top military spender relative to GDP, allocating nearly 5%. However, this surge in defence spending is funded by borrowing and is set to push Poland's budget deficit to 6.3% in 2025, the second highest in the EU.
Maintaining such a high budget deficit over the long term could be risky for the economy. The more debt we have, the more money we need to pay for it. This leaves less for other things we'd like to do with public funds.
6.3 is more than double the EU's suggested limit, but what sets Poland apart from other member states is its impressive economic growth, which in the first quarter of 2025 hit 3.2%, and experts see this as a key tool in cutting the deficit.
This should primarily take place through the growth of the entire economy and the revenue that can be generated from it. This way, we can achieve an effect that some economists refer to as growing out of debt. Firstly, it would help mitigate the scale of debt in relation to the entire economy, and secondly, it would make it easier to service and reduce the debt.
Last year, the government came up with a deficit reduction trajectory, aiming to bring the deficit down to 4.5 in 2026 and below 3% 2 years later. However, the European Commission's spring economic forecast predicts the deficit to remain above 6% next year. But there are several other conventional ways of cutting the deficit. Some, however, including increasing taxes or cutting social spending, require the approval of the president. And with President Karol Nawrocki, an ally of the opposition Law and Justice Party, the government expects resistance.
We can expect this period of heightened uncertainty to continue. Unfortunately, it overlaps with a rather dangerous international situation for Poland. It's been hard, and it's going to get even harder.
International ratings agency Fitch echoed these concerns.
The outcome of Poland's presidential election is likely to continue posing challenges for economic reforms and sustained fiscal consolidation and may exacerbate institutional clashes.
Some Polish economists, however, have a slightly different view on the situation.
Agencies base these kinds of assessments on quite a superficial understanding of the situation. Had they looked more closely at our current circumstances, I believe their evaluations would have been more balanced. I don't see an imminent risk. Of course, political tensions may have some influence, but not to the exaggerated extent that would justify such alarm.
Still, with Polish parliamentary elections looming in 2027, some economists believe that major fiscal consolidation seems unlikely. For TVP World, Jan Kennedy.
Lies, deep fakes and false documents, all in a coordinated Russian disinformation campaign designed to muddy the waters between Warsaw and Kyiv. This time, the target is a painful chapter in the neighbouring state's shared history and Poland's next president. Leandowski reports.
It began with what looked like an official government document. A letter in Ukrainian, allegedly signed by Ukraine's Minister of Culture, Michał Probierz, claiming that Kyiv had suspended all exhumation work at the site of the Volhynia massacres in Późniki. On the same day, a Facebook video showed a well-known Polish academic confirming the news. He criticized Ukraine, accusing it of retaliation after the Polish parliament declared July 11th a National Day of Remembrance for Polish victims of the 1943-45 Volhynia massacres. But there was one problem. The whole thing was fake, and the Facebook account completely fabricated. It impersonated Professor Andrzej Osowski, Poland's lead forensic expert on Volhynia. He quickly took to social media to condemn the fake content. On X, Osowski himself denied the footage, saying it was AI-generated and the statements were false and manipulated. He warned that the fake video damages the integrity of Polish-Ukrainian research and could mislead the public. Ukraine's Minister of Culture, Michał Probierz, also publicly debunked the letter, calling it entirely fake.
Warning, fake news. I did not sign any document regarding the alleged suspension of work in the town of Sadove, formerly Puzhniki, in the Ternopil Oblast. The party PL described the process as an historic and diplomatic breakthrough. Do not spread harmful propaganda.
The fake was carefully crafted and it worked. Using a fabricated profile and synthetic video, the campaign weaponized historical trauma and current politics to sow distrust. And experts believe the fingerprints point to none other than Russia. The target of the campaign? One of the most sensitive chapters in Polish-Ukrainian history, the Volhynia massacres, where over 100,000 Polish civilians were killed by Ukrainian nationalist forces during World War II. But the disinformation didn't just aim to divide nations. It could have meant to target Poland's president-elect Karol Nawrocki. A Eurosceptic, he has long accused Ukraine of stalling exhumations. In a June 7 interview with Hungarian outlet Mandiner, Nawrocki said Ukraine isn't ready for EU membership until it shows more respect for history and its neighbors.
I am against Ukraine's entry into the European Union at this moment. I recognize that we need to support Ukraine, but Ukraine must understand that countries such as Poland, Hungary, other European states have their own interests. Poland has specific interests, such as the exhumation in Volhynia.
His critics, though, claim Nawrocki's rhetoric clashes with Ukraine's EU ambitions.
The new Polish president's statement to the Hungarians over the weekend that he's not in support of Ukraine joining NATO or even the EU, a blow to the Ukrainians.
I'm not sure whether, on the whole, these past events should have a profound impact on Polish support for Ukraine.
The timing was no coincidence. Exhumations in western Ukraine resumed on April 24, the first since 2017, when Kyiv froze such works after UPA memorials were destroyed in Poland. And now, this fake news story, designed to look like a Ukrainian retaliation, risks inflaming tensions even more, painting a picture of unresolved wounds and rekindled mistrust. Diana Skaya for TVP World.
European far-right parties are closing their ranks. Hungary's Viktor Orban came to France to meet with Marine Le Pen and several other leaders of Europe's right-wing extreme. Sonia Gatabishchan has more.
A gathering of allies. Monday marks 1 year since Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally Party won its best-to-date share of votes in European elections, an occasion which the party celebrated in a small French village surrounded by other right-wing leaders from across Europe, including Hungary's Viktor Orban.
The European right is the target of attacks by bureaucrats and judges who have never been elected. We will put an end to it. The European patriots have united together and are taking the offensive.
The themes over which the conservative leaders united included anti-immigration, a dislike of the EU's Green Deal, and an overall dissatisfaction with the European Union.
This movement is actually a huge challenge for the European Union. It's a challenge for the ideology of Europe, of the unity of Europe, because we're all seeing that all these far-right parties are unable to create a project like the European Union. Their own project is dividing the European Union without providing any kind of alternatives for their people.
The gathering is taking place after Le Pen was convicted of embezzlement, a ruling which, unless overturned by a Court of Appeal hearing scheduled for mid-2026, prevents her from running in the 2027 presidential election.
Look at what's happening in France, where they want to prevent me, the main opposition figure, in violation of all legal principles, from running for the presidential election.
Marine Le Pen is facing one of the most difficult days in her career, her political career. She's no longer able to candidate to be president for the French Republic in 2027. So she's trying to prepare herself with a plan B.
The Monday rally also included a display of camaraderie between Le Pen and National Rally's Jordan Bardella.
Let's be clear, my friends. As Marine said, we do not reject Europe. We reject their Europe.
Le Pen insists she is a viable presidential candidate, but Bardella said he would run if she could not. Previously a Plan B candidate, Bardella's presidential bid is now gaining serious momentum. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishchan.
The local elections in two Serbian towns saw the victory of government-backed candidates, but the narrow win shows that 7 months after the eruption of countrywide students' protests, the opposition has gained much support among the voters who previously backed President Vucic's party. Paweł Trzaskowski reports.
Only about 35,000 ballots were cast on Sunday in Serbia's local elections for two small municipalities. However, this handful of votes captured the country's attention, serving as a barometer for the current political sympathies in Serbia.
That's a test to which extent the protests that lasted now 7 months already have changed the electorate.
7 months ago, this is when nationwide protests erupted in Serbia. Continuing for over half a year, they have proved to be the biggest challenge to the country's president Aleksandar Vučić and the ruling Serbian Progressive Party, with protesters opposing state capture and corruption. And as the elections in Zaječar and Kosjerić were the first after the breakout of these protests, they were to show whether those in power are now on the defensive. Eventually, candidates supported by President Vučić won in both cities, however narrowly.
These are small places, and when you get challenged the government in these smaller places, this means that the general trend is changing.
For numerous experts, the lead of pro-government candidates was the most likely outcome of Sunday's vote, and this eventual victory was to become a symbol of the Serbs' trust in President Vučić.
Even a narrow victory would be presented basically as a great victory.
And in fact, despite pro-government candidates winning by a mere 51 votes in Kosjerić and fewer than 2,000 in Zaječar, Aleksandar Vučić was triumphant.
I'm especially proud of the result we have in Zaječar. I'm proud because in the previous elections we had 42% of the votes on a 51% turnout. Today, we received almost 48% of the votes.
And these narrow victories were secured using a vast government apparatus.
It was a full campaign. I mean, coming into a place, where you have 10,000 people living, the entire government comes there. They also send some bullies.
Challenging the government were lists of candidates only supported by student protesters, as those who openly oppose Vučić still refrain from forming any political entities.
Students have been hesitating so far to completely cooperate with or more heavily cooperate with opposition parties.
One of their main goals is forcing the government to call snap elections. But some experts believe that in order to take further steps, the protesters should come up with a more specific political proposition.
I think it's time for them to go ahead and unite and present a more broader political platform for Serbia and for the Serbian people.
But for now, despite the defeat, the protests continue. A new demonstration was held in the country's capital on Monday. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
And now, an off-the-pitch row between Poland's best footballer, Robert Lewandowski, and the national team coach has generated headlines around the world. After being stripped of the captaincy, the country's all-time top scorer said he will no longer play for Poland as long as the coach remains in his position, raising the question of whether the Barcelona star runs the risk of harming his legacy. John Todd has this report.
Polish goal machine Robert Lewandowski last month celebrating Barcelona's domestic treble. Now, though, Poland's all-time top scorer is embroiled in a bitter battle with the national coach. The striker late Sunday posted on social media that he will not play in the national team after being stripped of the captaincy by Michał Probierz. Experts say the apparent fit of peak doesn't play well.
We say that all the time that none of the players can be above the team. And this is what happens with Lewandowski. I mean, he suddenly became, in his own opinion, in his own mind, he became just too big for this team, yeah?
As international interest in the story blew up online, Lewandowski on Monday spoke to Wirtualna Polska Sportowe Fakty to plead his case.
I received an unexpected call from coach Michał Probierz informing me that he had decided to strip me of the captain's armband. The news came completely out of the blue. I was putting my kids to bed. I didn't even have time to tell my family or talk to anyone about what had happened, because moments later a statement was posted on the Polish Football Association website. I had worn an armband for 11 years and I've been playing for the national team for 17. It seemed to me that this wasn't the right way to handle a matter like this.
It came as Probierz faced the press ahead of a key World Cup qualifier match on Tuesday.
I am fully aware that the decision I made regarding an exceptional player was a difficult one. However, the nature of football often requires us to take a broader view and prioritize what is best for the team as a whole.
Former teammates Kamil Glik and Kamil Grosicki have backed taking the captain's armband from Lewandowski, with the former posting bravo and Grosicki marking the moment, saying it's going down. Analysts say Lewandowski's legacy is unlikely to be tarnished by the furore, and there's a precedent in Zbigniew Boniek, who left the team but is now remembered for his role in Poland's third place in the 1982 World Cup.
And the same will be with Lewandowski. I mean, in 20 years' time or in 15 years' time, no one will be talking about how Lewandowski ended his career, but everyone will be talking that he just carried the team on his shoulders.
In his place, Probierz has named Inter Milan midfielder Piotr Zielinski as the new captain. He reportedly didn't finish training on Monday ahead of the World Cup qualifier against Finland. Lewandowski says he's rooting for his replacement. He'll also be hoping the off-pitch antics don't cast a shadow over what looks like an unfitting end to a long career representing his country. John Todd for TVP World.
Russia will be ready to attack NATO by 2030, says the Alliance's Secretary-General Mark Rutte, as he urges member states to ramp up defense spending ahead of the upcoming summit in The Hague. Meanwhile, Moscow has conducted the biggest attack on Ukraine cities so far, only hours before a major prisoner swap. To talk about it all, we're joined by Andra Zumlant, analyst at the Stockholm Centre for Eastern European Studies. Good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for accepting our invitation. So nearly 500 drones and 20 missiles attacked Ukrainian cities last night. Now, is this the retaliation for Kyiv's Spiders web special operation, or should we expect even more vicious strikes on Putin's side?
There have been large attacks on various Ukrainian cities, including Kyiv, where I'm currently, which are comparable to the ones we have seen recently. And this surge is perhaps more related to the increased capabilities of Russia to launch such drones, for instance. And I don't think that these counterstrikes by Ukraine have any escalatory effect. They are now interpreted that way. But I've been here in Kyiv when there were large attacks in earlier months before Ukraine had these successes with the Tupolev bombers, destroying strategic bombers in Russia's rear.
Mm-hmm. I see. Now let's talk about Ukrainian counter or sabotage operations deep behind enemy's lines. Now, let's talk about Spiders web. It has proven to be highly effective. So, could we expect more such countermeasures from Kyiv, given the damage they can inflict?
Yes, this is obviously now going to repeat. All of this could have been, of course, avoided if Russia would have taken Zelensky's offer to go for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Then the attack on the strategic bombers would not have happened. The attack on the Crimea, so-called Crimea bridge, the Kerch bridge, would not have happened, and many other similar and perhaps less spectacular attacks would not have happened. The war is now accelerating in that both countries have more and more capabilities to strike the other country in the rear. And Ukraine does that, targeting military sites, and Russia does that by simply terrorizing the Ukrainian population and striking the cities, apartment houses, hospitals, universities, and so on.
Let's discuss politics and diplomacy for a while. Now, as we're talking about Ukraine, its accession into NATO seems as distant as ever, but now also the Polish president-elect Karol Nawrocki is questioning Kyiv's future EU membership. Now, what do you make of it?
I was dismayed by it. One of the arguments was about the competition in agriculture, but one should remember that Poland itself had these sort of problems when it was acceding in the 1990s and early 2000s to the European Union. There were also West European farmers back then that were afraid of Poland entering the European Union, of the competition on the agricultural market, of labor migration, and so on. But if one remembers, this has been all resolved, and there have been then intermediate solutions for certain transition periods, and that is obviously something that has to also happen with Ukraine. But to give now this signal from Poland is very depressing, of course, for the Ukrainians to hear that from a country that was seen and is still seen by most Ukrainians as a friend of Ukraine.
Well, the next NATO summit in The Hague is just around the corner. Now, what are your expectations from this summit? Mark Rutte stated today in London that the Hague meeting will transform the alliance as we know it now.
I think that can indeed happen because we have already many developments in this direction. In the national states, for instance, in Germany, we have now a new situation with spending on military affairs, with a very fundamental discussion about national security and the future of the German army, that Merz wants to become the strongest army in Europe. And we have also these developments on the European level, on the EU level. And now it's time to take it to the Atlantic, to the Euro-Atlantic level. And that's why, indeed, I hope so, and it should be a transformative summit for NATO itself, but also for NATO's support for Ukraine.
Talking about defense spending, some NATO members invest in Ukraine's domestic military industry. Now, I'm wondering whether this is also counted as part of the 5% GDP defense investment as demanded by Donald Trump.
Yes, I guess that would be a good calculation, so to say. And I think the countries will have to sort of calculate this, their expenses for security affairs in such a way that indeed to reach the 5%, but that is possible because the nature of warfare is now changing, and there are many non-kinetic aspects that concern national security and that have to be taken care of, and that can have grave consequences for if they are not taken care of, for the national security of states. And one of these ways to increase the security of NATO member states is to invest into the Ukrainian military-industrial complex, thereby helping Ukraine, but also helping the security of their own countries and jointly developing new weapon systems.
Andra Zumlant, analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more news and features here on TVP World.